tedious chore. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets, and along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. The site we were examining was located at the base of Masada, and soon we all decided that we should go to the top of Masada and film these areas from there. As we took the cable car to the top, the view was breathtaking. The shape of the city was perfectly revealed below us. Here we saw a giant platform-like area, perfectly symmetrical, which was identical to the temple areas of other ancient cities, such as the biblical Shushan or Susa, located in present-day Iran. Then we saw the raised section which we had climbed upon earlier, with the sphinx shape and the ziggurat. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this to convince others.
All right. So,
we were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than.
So this is a YouTube video just kind of pointing out these archaeologists' findings. But we do know that Sodom and Gomorrah existed, and probably most likely was in the southern part, because we're going to see in chapter 19 that in verse 27, early the next morning Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord, okay, which was the place where he was constantly interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land in the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. So wherever Abraham was in chapter 18, dialoguing with Yahweh about not destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, he was able to wake up the next morning and see the smoke coming. So he wasn't far from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So most likely he was in the northern part of the Dead Sea, as their findings showed, the northern western part of the Dead Sea. And also, we know that it took the angels, it says in verse 1 of chapter 19, 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting, in chapter 19, verse 1, in the gateway of the city. So when the angels left Abraham's tent, they were able to get to Sodom and Gomorrah by the same day, in the evening. And what's interesting is, from where Abraham was, which was most likely in Hebron, it takes about, it's about an 18-mile journey. It would have taken about half a day to travel there. If they would have came and ate with Abraham in chapter 18 in the morning and left right before noon, they could have gotten there by the evening and saw Lot with the city leaders at the gates. And of course, Lot will invite them into his home, and that's where the whole interaction will come, where the men of the city want to have sex with the angels, and then the destruction will begin to unfold in the city. So it's interesting that this city looks like it's been destroyed by fire and brimstone. It's a city of ashes. It's been preserved. So when you consider the Bible, you need to consider that the Bible is historically true. The events, the times, the places, and also the prophecies. Another key cultural historical issue you need to consider is the city gates and the hospitality of the guests that we'll see in verses 1 through 3. That Lot is at the city gates with the key leaders. Now when you study the Old Testament, whenever you see this term, the city gates, you need to realize what it's talking about is the place where business happens, the place where politics happens, the place where all the major leaders of a city are. It's sort of like going into the city hall or going into council meetings. That's where business people, political leader, people who are concerned about the power issues of a city tend to meet. So Lot, the nephew of Abraham, is amongst these men at this point. He's really become enculturated with the city. And then the third thing that you need to consider is God remembering Abraham in verse 29, which I already noted that it says in verse 29, God remembered Abraham. Now, this idea of God remembering Abraham, and I think the reason why it's there, it says, he looked toward Sodom, Abraham looked toward all the land of the plain, and he saw the dense smoke rising from the land. I mean, God completely destroyed this city, and he's seeing the aftermath. It says that, verse 29, so when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. So this idea that God remembers Abraham. And this idea of remembering is a covenant idea. That God remembers those who are his. God remembers those who are his. And I like the fact that in the New Testament, the writer of Hebrews talks about the fact that God will not forget the work that you have done in showing love towards his saints. God does not forget people, especially people who are in the covenant with him. And the writer, Moses, is basically, through the inspiration of the Spirit, saying, look, ultimately why God rescued Lot was because of Abraham. God remembered to keep the promise that anyone who blesses Abraham will be blessed, and anyone who curses Abraham will be cursed. Lot was a man, though he wasn't the most spiritual man, he was a good man, and he seems to have a real response to the voice of God. But ultimately, he becomes a benefactor of protection and blessing because of Abraham, because God remembers Abraham. And how we need for God to remember us. How we need for God to remember us. And this idea is one of covenant language, where we who are close to God, God remembers us on the day of destruction, to rescue us, to help us, to be with us.